Hey everybody, let's talk about the federal bureaucracy today. Um, this is chapter 15 in your book. When we talk bureaucracy, literally like rule by desks. When we think of bureaucrats, we think of government clerks, we think about paper pushers, we think of like living in a huge office in a cubicle with fluorescent lighting. Um, and literally, like you take a look at this picture here, this is what makes me think of a bureaucracy. The mortal fear that someone somewhere is working efficiently and without our permission. Um, but what bureaucrats do, and the big thing that they do, is they implement and regulate government policies. They are administrators in the government. A lot of times they work behind the scenes. We don't even see what bureaucrats do. Um, they do depend on certain things. A bureaucratic agency has a hierarchical authority structure. Power flows from the top down, and responsibility flows from the bottom up. It uses what we call task specialization. Bureaucrats are experts in their fields. They perform technical jobs. They're not amateurs. A bureaucrat could be someone that works in an office. If you need a new social security card, a bureaucrat can also be someone that inspects fruit to see what a grade A orange is. Um, Something like that. They are an expert in their field. Bureaucrats also help develop extensive rules that allow things to all be handled in the same way so that there's no questions about how things can be done. Here's an example. This is the Department of the Interior. This picture is also in your book where you can see the Secretary of the Interior is up at the top, and then all these other bureaucrats that do things as far as for the Department of the Interior. You see things Fish and Wildlife, National Park Service, Indian Affairs, all these Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Geological Survey. All these are part of the Interior Department that is headed by the Secretary of the Interior. Um, Bureaucratic agencies are created by Congress, not the president. Congress sets the budget for bureaucratic agencies and write policies that they administer. Bureaucrats are responsible to the president. Um, and that's where we see, like in the Constitution, it says that the president has to execute the law. Well, the president cannot do that by himself, so he has bureaucrats to help him accomplish things. Um, the bureaucratic agencies manage and control over 200 agencies, 2,000 other authorities, departments, commissions. They're in charge of all kinds of things. Bureaucrats and bureaucratic agencies are the ones that kind of help carry out the laws like the executive branch is supposed to do. A couple myths here about bureaucrats and facts. A lot of people think Americans don't like bureaucrats, but for the most part, Americans do like bureaucrats and the treatment that they get from them. Some think that all bureaucrats work in Washington, D.C. The fact is, only about 12% of employees, civilian employees for the bureaucracy, work in D.C. Most of them are spread all the way around the country doing all kinds of things for the American people. A couple other things, myths that bureaucracies are growing bigger and bigger every year. The fact of the matter is, like, bureaucracy is shrinking, and we kind of see that with the Trump administration. He's shrinking bureaucratic agencies, trying to cut out some of the government spending. A lot of people think bureaucracies are ineffective. Again, kind of not true. That the bureaucracies are a way of organizing people to perform work. Sometimes it's inefficient at times, but no one has figured out a better way to do things for our government. Even we've tried to privatize like bureaucratic organizations like our prison system, and that stuff hasn't worked out very well. A lot of people think that bureaucracies are impersonal. Their procedures are too complex. They stifle effectiveness. When they think of bureaucracies, they think about red tape and all the hoops that you have to jump through to get things. And if you've ever had to get something new, like a new Social Security card or a new birth certificate, those can be difficult things. Lots of red tape, lots of forms to fill out, lots of windows to go to. If you ever have to go do that, it can be difficult to do things. So, what do bureaucracies do? They possess information and expertise. Um, they help to carry things out. They perform services provided by the federal government, and because of their expertise, they have discretion to carry out policies. A lot of the things that bureaucrats do aren't very controversial at all, um, but they have to carry out the policy decisions of the president, and we're going to hear this word a lot: bureaucratic discretion. Um, they have some discretion in carrying out policies. Who makes up the federal bureaucracy? About 4 million employees in the federal bureaucracy. Almost 3 million of them are civilians or civil servants. The president only appoints about 3% of them. 15 cabinet level positions are part of the bureaucracies. We mentioned the independent agencies and bureaus before. The Department of Defense is our largest bureaucracy. Um, Second to the Postal Service, and third is Veterans Affairs. So lots of people work for these different bureaucratic agencies. Uh, you think about the percentage of America's workforce, um, federal government employment has been shrinking and not growing, uh, but it did go up shortly after 9/11. But since then, it's kind of the trend. It's been trending down for federal employment. Um, Again, who are they? Bureaucrats. They're the people that work at the federal level. Most of them actually are men up at the top. Women and non-whites are kind of clustered in the lower ranks of civil service, but they are making gains. Again, cabinet level positions, and you have people like mailmen, park services, things like this. Um, we mentioned them again here, right? Postal Service, Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, all other functions of the federal government make up about 25% of federal employees. So what is civil service? Um, until the late 19th century, government jobs were done through patronage, which, if you remember from American history, you were given a job because you were somebody's friend. Um, Kind of the spoils system. President Chester A. Arthur passed this law called the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which created the civil service. And that's a Pendleton Civil Service Act. That's a law that comes up a lot on the AP test. But people now, there's a law that we can't just appoint people to jobs because you're friends of the president or friends of someone in government. You actually have to have some type of skill. Civil service system uses merit to give people jobs. That's how they get promotions based on merit, not necessarily because they know someone. Um, Another law called the Hatch Act prohibits federal civil service employees from active participation in partisan politics, um, which basically means if you're a federal employee, like uh, you can't favor one political party over the other, which seems to be what got James Comey in trouble, the former head of the FBI. Um, Seemed to be favoring one political party seemed to be favoring the Democrats over the Republicans, at least in the view of Donald Trump, and that's one of the reasons why he was fired. Uh, in the White House, the Office of Personnel Management is the group that is in charge of hiring for most agencies. Um, they send names to the agency for open positions, and once a person is hired, they get on a federal salary scale and they start making money. You can kind of see that there. They actually do have pretty good wages and benefits. Uh, with civil servants, kind of one of the things they have is like they have good job security. Firing incompetent workers is difficult because after a probationary period, civil servants are protected. Um, and basically, what that means is you can't be fired as a civil servant because the president doesn't like what you're doing, even though you kind of work for him. Uh, if you are someone that works for the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Agency, and you don't want to carry out some of Trump's immigration things, he actually can't fire you. You have that discretion to kind of interpret his rules as you would like. You might get in trouble from another boss, but the president cannot fire you for those things. You're protected from politically motivated firings. Um, Employees versus appointments. Important to understand here the difference. The big difference is the appointees come at the high level. These are the people that need Senate confirmation. About 3 to 4,000 positions. They support the president's message and serve at the will of the president. Can be fired very easily by the president. The employees are the civil servants. No presidential control. Very hard to fire a civil servant. A lot of times they're at odds with the president's agenda, and that is because they have bureaucratic discretion, right? They make decisions that are free of presidential influence. The president may want them to do something, but they don't actually have to carry out what the president wants them to do. Um, Good example of this is the family separations that they were doing over the summer at the border. Even though the Trump administration ordered that, ultimately, like the bureaucrats who were carrying this law out can use their discretion and say, hey, like, we're not going to separate the families at the border. Um, they have discretion to do those types of things. And this is just an example. You might see this. This is the Plum Book. This is a real thing that actually lists like all the jobs available in the federal government. They actually have to list those things out. Functions of the federal bureaucracy, again, they are implementers. They carry out decisions of Congress. They translate legislative policies into programs. Um, they're the ones that work out the details of a program. Congress will pass a law, and the bureaucratic agencies fill in how these laws are carried out. Sometimes implementation of laws break down because of bad programs, bad design, lack of clarity, lack of resources. And usually when a breakdown occurs, the bureaucracy takes some blame for things. They have administrative functions. Uh, they use, again, standard operating procedures to make daily decisions across the entire country. And again, they have bureaucratic discretion. We mentioned this again. Sometimes you'll hear of street level bureaucrats that work on the day to day interactions with people, like police officers, welfare worker, court judges, and they can kind of do things as they please, um, carrying out federal rules and regulations. Think of like your TSA worker in the airport. They use their discretion to decide who they're going to search and who they're not going to give the extra search to. And again, regulation. The bureaucracy regulates things. They write regulations. They carry out regulations, and they're supposed to be in the interest of the public. There are independent regulatory agencies that make rules. They settle disputes. Um, Agency has to apply guidelines and enforce rules. Sometimes it sends inspectors into the fields. A good example of this is OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administrations. They make sure people are doing things safely at their jobs. And people can get in trouble for not doing things safely in their jobs. Here's a picture here. This construction worker saved a drowning woman in in Des Moines, Iowa. You can see the photos here. But OSHA fined the company because they did not use the crane properly and put the worker in harm's way. And the company got in trouble even though they saved this woman's life. We mentioned discretionary authority again. That is the main source of power in the bureaucracy, their ability to write in the details after Congress has passed laws. This is the rulemaking authority. Their rules essentially have the same force of law. And this is a huge thing for bureaucrats, the rulemaking authority. Uh, Four types of bureaucratic agencies. We mentioned cabinet departments, regulatory agencies. There's also these things called government corporations and independent executive agencies. Your cabinet departments, which we mentioned before, all chosen by the president, confirmed by the Senate. Uh, each department manages a specific policy area, has its own budget, has its own staff. Um, Social Security Administration is an independent agency, or became an independent agency in 1995. It's the largest federal agency. We have independent executive agencies. They are not part of cabinet departments. They perform specialized functions, but the heads of these departments are appointed by the president and serve at the pleasure of the president, which means he can fire them whenever he wants. These are groups like NASA. These are groups like the EPA that can carry out specialized functions. There are things called independent regulatory commissions. They're responsible for making sure that people are doing things in the public instance, things like the Interstate Commerce Commission, the Federal Reserve Board, the Federal Communications Commission. These people can't be fired by the president. They're appointed for fixed terms in office by the president, and they are confirmed by the Senate.